Hello everybody and welcome to our webinar today about the implementation of the MLPS in practice, the grading and registration. Me, Mareike Seselberg, and my colleague Zahao Liao are happy to introduce you today to some practical experience with conducting the MLPS, the multi-level protection scheme in China. I guess everybody listening to this has probably heard of the multi-level protection scheme in China before. And so have many of the companies we are working for. It's nothing new that the multi-level protection scheme needs to be conducted for IT systems in China. But in our experience, we see that many companies do not really know how to do and where to start. When talking to clients of us, we often encounter questions like, is the multi-level protection scheme mandatory? Are there any consequences if I don't do it? Which exactly are the laws and regulations in regard of the MLPS? Are there any problems while conducting it, or how much does it cost? So actually there are a lot of questions, and we will try to give some answers to these questions in the webinar. Even though this webinar is meant to be a practical webinar, we want to talk about our experience. I want to start with a short theoretical part. So the legal basis of the multi-level protection scheme actually is the cybersecurity law, which came into force in June 2017, so already 4 years now. And this was the first time that in a law the multi-level protection scheme was mentioned. And from this time on, it was mandatory for companies to conduct the multi-level protection scheme for their systems to protect them from interference, destruction, or unauthorized access, and to prevent network data from being leaked, being stolen, or tampered with. But actually, the cybersecurity law is not very precise about how to conduct the multi-level protection scheme. So even before the cybersecurity law, there have been some regulations which gave more details about the MLPS. But of course, after 2017, we have seen a lot of regulations and also standards regulating the multi-level protection scheme and giving more details on how it has to be conducted. You can see some of these regulation and standards listed on this slide. Of course, it's not all of them. There are quite a lot. And as you can see, a lot of them are standards, and a lot of these standards are not mandatory, but they still are a very good guideline how to do the MLPS and what you have to pay attention to. So basically, you can divide the multi-level protection scheme procedure in 5 steps. The first step is the grading of IT systems. That means you give the IT system a certain level, a security level. The second step is the registration, meaning you have to register the security level of the IT systems with the local public security bureau. The third step then is to do an analysis, meaning you have to check the legal requirements for the certain security levels and see where there are gaps between the security level of the systems and the legal requirements. And then, of course, you have to adapt your systems to rectify the problems that have been found. The fourth step is the evaluation, meaning that there is a certified, authorized test center checking if after your rectification, your systems are compliant with the cybersecurity law and the multi-level protection scheme. And the fifth step is the inspection by the Public Security Bureau, which then confirms that what is written on the paper has actually been conducted and that your systems are now compliant. For today, we want mainly to talk about the first and the second step. They are most important and should be done by the companies as soon as possible. So the first 2 steps can again be divided in 5 minor steps, about which I will talk a little bit more in the following slides. So the first thing you need to do after you have decided that you will now start to conduct the multi-level protection scheme is to determine the scope of the multi-level protection scheme. That means you have to check which systems do you need to do the grading for? Basically, all the systems are subject to the MLPS. So that means all basic information networks, all computer platforms, big data systems, IoT, industrial control systems, and also mobile internet are basically subject to the MLPS. In our experience, and to give you an example, systems that normally need to do the grading are the OA, Office Administration, the Customer Relationship Management, ERP, also PDM systems, and for example, in China it might also be relevant to do the grading for official WeChat accounts and stuff like that. So how do we conduct this determination of scope? We normally start with a simple Excel list. That means the first step is to just consider which systems does your company have, and then list them all in this list. At that point of time, it's not wise to consider if in the end these systems need to be graded or not. This list is just about filing in what systems does your company use and have. And the information that we need to decide if this system has to be graded or not is, for example, the main functions of the system, who has developed it, how many users are there, is it used internally, or are there also external personnel who use this system, and so on. So this is the first step, and here are some tips that we have, some hints what you should pay attention to while doing this. First of all, you should list all systems. As I just said, it would be bad if you miss out on any system at that step, because in the end, it's you who knows the systems that your company is using. So if you don't inform us on an existing system, we have no way to know that this system exists, so we cannot give you advice on if it should be graded or not. So in the first step, really think broad, just list all of the systems that you can think of. And as I said, that might also include systems like a WeChat business account or things like that. Then one question that we often encounter is cloud services. I mean, many cloud platforms like Alibaba, they have advertisement on their website, or they tell everybody we are MLPS compliant. But that doesn't mean that if you use their services, you necessarily do not need to do MLPS for yourself, especially if you're using it as IaaS or PaaS. It has to be checked case for case if you have to do the MLPS for any application that you run on the cloud. For software as a service, it also has to be checked. Oftentimes, if it's software as a service, you do not need to do the MLPS, but still you should list this system too, and we will then check if it needs to be graded or not. Also, a question that we often see is, for example, if an application is actually run in a headquarter in Germany and the server is located in Germany, and the Chinese branch is just using the system, meaning they enter it from China and they process data on the system, on the server in Germany. Do we need to do the MLPS or not? So actually, oftentimes you don't need to do the MLPS for systems like that, but still you should also list them so that we can confirm that in this special case it's really not necessary. It's sometimes not so easy to decide, because the Chinese government gave a sort of principle how to decide for which systems the MLPS needs to be done. And you can see it below. It's who manages is responsible, who operates is responsible, and who uses is responsible. And actually who is responsible needs to do the MLPS. But in our experience, most important part of this principle are the first two, who manages and who operates is responsible and therefore needs to do the MLPS. In cases where a software or a system is just used but actually operated in another country, in our experience, oftentimes it's not necessary to do the MLPS. So after you have the whole list with all the systems, we will do, or we'll help you to do an initial assessment. When you assess the systems to decide on the level, the security level, you have to consider it from two sides. One side is that the aim of the MLPS is to protect data. So you will consider from a data protection point of view if this system is highly security relevant or not. And the second step is you will consider the safety of the system functions in general, meaning by this step you consider if something happens, will it influence the running operation of the system? So these are the two main aims: to protect data and to protect the system so that it can run smoothly and will not hamper the normal business. If you consider this, you will, for both aspects, choose a security level from 1 to 5. And then you will see which of these two aspects has the higher security level, and this will then be the overall level of the whole system. So there are not two security levels for one system, but you will choose the higher graded level to decide the overall level of the system. So this sounds a little bit difficult, because you will probably ask, okay, but how do I decide which level the system is in? The Chinese regulations give some hints on how to do that. The three main criteria are, is there any danger to national security? Does it endanger society order and public interest, or does it endanger the legitimate rights of citizens and organizations? And then you will see if these rights that I just listed here, or this security, is endangered in general, seriously, or very seriously. And yeah, going from this, you can just use this grid to see then which level you should grade the system in. From our general experience, for most companies operating in China, this will be level 2 to 3. Level 5 is state-owned companies or authorities. So this is normally not relevant for any foreign company operating in China. Also, level 4 is something that we have not encountered before, but it might happen. So actually, for most companies, level 2 to 3 will be most important. But as I say, this grid is also not that helpful, because it's very hard to decide if the legitimate rights of citizens or organizations is endangered in general or seriously. So what are the specific questions that you can ask yourself while doing this, this grading? The first thing you have to consider are consequences of a damage to the system. So example, if the system is damaged, might it reduce your operational capacity, or might it lead to litigation? Might there even be a property damage or a negative social impact? And in practice, what you also can consider is which amount of data or information and which type of information is contained in the systems. Meaning, of course, if there's sensible personal information in these systems, if they are leaked, it's a bigger issue than if some very generic technical information is leaked. Who are the users of the system? So a system that is only used by a small amount of people is, of course, a lower security level than a system that is used by a lot of people. It also depends on from where you can access the system. If it's a system only that can only be used for employees in China, it might be a lower security level than if employees from 10 other countries can also access to this data. What is the purpose of the use of the system? Is it critical for your normal business operations, or is it just a system that is nice to have, but if it doesn't work, it will not have a big influence on your normal business? Is there cross-border data flows, and which amount of personal or important data is transferred? The concept of important data is something very special to the Chinese law, and it's still about to be defined what exactly important data includes, but it's definitely a term that you should keep in mind, because it will be essential for your further conduct in China. And with that, I want to hand over to my colleague Zihao Liao, who will tell you more about third step of the MLPS.
Thank you very much, Mahaika. Before talking about the expert review, I'd like to supplement a little bit about the initial assessment. And according to the current laws and regulations in China, only if the information system is initially identified as level 2 or higher, then the expert review is required. Currently, the laws and regulations do not stipulate that expert review requirements for the system of level 1. So some companies might think about that. Maybe all systems could be initially identified as level 1 to save a lot of time and money for the further process. In practice, however, it's not common and is also not recommended, because if the system is identified as level 1 or 2, it's only decided by the Public Security Bureau, namely PSB. So it makes no sense if the company intentionally identifies all systems as level 1. And now let's go into the topic about expert review. The first question is who the experts are. The laws and regulations do not state the scope of the experts, and in practice there are differences in some different cities or regions. For example, the city Beijing requires the participation of MLPS examiners, and these examiners are certified by the state, and most of them work at the MPS test center. Besides the MLPS examiners, there are also some professors in the university or some IT experts in the company or industry are also the scope of expert review. And it also worth mentioning that sometimes the staff of PSB is also involved in the process of expert review. And after we know who the experts are, now there is the question, what is the content of the expert review? Actually, the expert review is quite easy. It's just a formal review. And the experts will not examine the systems on-site in the company by using tools to test the systems of the company and then list some questions or problems the systems have and then provide some solutions. The content of this are the step 3 and 4 analysis and the solutions. The expert review is just about that the experts will determine if the system's level has been identified correctly. Therefore, it doesn't take a long time, usually within 1 day. And in the expert review, the company must explain the basic information of the systems and also the data processed in the systems. And then the experts will ask some questions related to the system and information in the system and check if the initial assessment is conducted correctly. The experts will sometimes also ask the questions about the format of the documents, so the company should also take care of that. And at the end, all the experts will give a final conclusion if they think the level of the system is correct and sign the protocol so that the company can prove that the expert review was conducted. Expert review is a very important part of the whole process, and after the experts have reviewed and determined the level of the system, usually the PSB will also accept that. So regarding the expert review, I'd like to give some suggestions. First, during the expert review, the company must send a responsible person to take part in the process, and this person must prepare and introduce the information in the system and answer the question of the experts. And in practice, many companies will hire other service providers to conduct MLPS. And in this case, the company should still send a responsible person to take part in the process. And secondly, the scope of the experts is very large, as I said. And during the expert review in the practice, 3 experts need to participate in the process at the same time. So the time coordination of the experts is a big issue. Therefore, I'd like to suggest organizing the appointment of the experts early. And thirdly, PSB participation is not mandatory, as I said, but I'd like to say it's not a bad thing if the staff of the PSB is already involved in the process of expert review because the PSB finally decides the level of the system. So if the staff of PSB is already involved in this phase, it can identify problems in advance. And after the expert review, a large part of the work is actually over. And because the next step is to revise the documents and then submit them to the PSB. There are a few documents that the company must fill out, such as MLPS filing form or Network and Information Security Committee letters, etc. And all of these documents are in Chinese. And in practice, the PSB will also require the documents to be filled in Chinese. And the list of these documents are just an example. There might be differences in different cities or regions. After the company submitted the documents to the PSB, and the company usually will get the certification after 1 to 2 work. And sometimes due to too much of the PSB, it might be delayed. And there are 2 different certificates shown here. One is from the PSB in Beijing, and another one is from PSB in a city in North China. Although each city or region has own regulations about MLPS and also such certification, etc., but the certificates shown here don't differ too much. The content of the certificate is also very simple, just the name of the company, once the name of the system and also its level are shown here. About the last step, registration, there are also some tips from my side. First, the certificate actually only proves that the company has finished the classification and the registration process. It doesn't mean that there are no cybersecurity problems of the systems, and it doesn't mean that the PSB will not inspect the company afterwards. Therefore, the further implementation of MLPS 325 is necessary and also mandatory. Secondly, if there is a significant change or if there are changes that could affect the level of the system, we recommend doing the registration process again so that the company can get the new certificate, namely the right certificate. And thirdly, currently not all laws or regulations about MLPS in China are enforced. That means that other obligations or other processes may come in the future. In this way, we'd like to recommend that the company definitely have to pay more attention to the current law and regulations and keep an eye on it. Okay, further, my colleague will talk about the project management of MLPS.
So hearing after all this, you probably have one question left, which is how long does it take? So we are still talking about the first 2 steps of the MLPS. So all in all, the MLPS 1 to 5, all steps will take even longer, but for the first 2 steps until the registration of your security level of the systems, how long will it take? First, the determination of the scope and the assessment of the level of protection will take us 5 working days. That means these are really days that we work on it. It might take a few days longer due to delayment in communication and so on. At this step, an IT consultant or us will handle the project and will be in very close contact to an employee of the customer of us, as there will be some questions in regard to the systems and certain details. So this is 5 days, and then the experts review. Actually, as my colleague said, it's like you can do it in 1 day, but the reason why it says 1 to 2 weeks here is because it's a lot of coordination. We first need to find the 4 experts. This is easier in bigger cities, and there are also lists with experts that you can do the expert review with. But sometimes it's hard to find 1 day where they all have time. This might even be harder in normal times where you will not do it online but offline, the meeting. During Corona, we did it online, so the timing is a little bit easier, but what makes it take a longer time during Corona is that all the experts need to sign and stamp on the report of the expert review. So during Corona, if you do these meetings online, it means you will have to send the documents to all of the experts and make them sign them. So for this step, you should calculate a little bit more time. Then for the review by the authorities, namely the PSB and the certification, it should not take a lot of time. The PSB has regulations saying that they can only take a few days to issue the certification, but actually from our experience, it will take longer, sometimes even longer than the 1 week. And it also depends on the fact if the PSB has already participated in the expert review or not. If they have not, they might at this stage still have some questions in regard of the report, so that may delay the certification a little bit longer. So all in all, if you calculate with 2 to 3 months for the first 2 steps, it might be the safest. It should be possible to finish it within 3 months of time. So that's it from our side. We hope it was informative for you, and thank you for your attention. And of course, if you have any questions after this webinar, you can see here again our contacts, and please feel free to send us an email or call anytime. Thank you and have a nice day. Bye.